But this really hit home to me, the fact that I was multitasking and having a very hard time paying attention. In 2003, we would follow people with stopwatches in the workplace. And at that time, we found they averaged 2.5 minutes on any screen before switching. Fast forward between the years of 2016 and 2020, we found that attention averaged 47 seconds.
Psychologist Professor Gloria Mark.
I actually registered for a TikTok account to do research for my book and also found myself going down a rabbit hole. TikTok has a very sophisticated recommender engine. It learns from your behavior and it learns what you like. It's not possible for humans to multitask, which means doing two things in parallel at the same time, unless one of those things is automatic. What I mean by automatic is it takes longer to do anything. When you're shifting your attention between two things, there's a switch cost. And the switch cost is the two other reasons why multitasking is bad. It leads to more errors. It creates stress. We have a limited amount of attentional resources. One study that shows that a children's linguistic ability is worse the more time they're on screens.
Hey there, welcome to the Happy Habit Podcast. I'm Matthew. I like to talk health, well-being, motivation, inspiration, self-improvement with a little bit of science thrown in for good measure. With new episodes coming every Monday and Thursday. There are almost 400 episodes now already in the can. And throughout many of those episodes, I talk to many of the world's leading experts in the health, wellness and self-improvement space. So I think certainly something for everyone. And if you're getting value at all from tuning in, from consuming these episodes, well then please join the conversation by liking, subscribing, sharing with friends and family alike, and do leave the podcast a positive rating on whatever platform you are enjoying these episodes. Now, a question for you. Do you notice that your levels of focus and attention are worse than they used to be? Are you finding yourself easily distracted, more easily distracted than before? Well, today's guest will be of interest to you if that is the case. I'm joined by Gloria Mark. She is a psychologist and is Chancellor's Professor in the Department of Informatics at the University of California, Irvine. She is also the author of the recently published book, Attention Span. Professor Mark is very interested in examining how we can find our focus again and fight distraction. In this episode, we hear shocking facts about how much our focus has deteriorated in recent years. We talk about the explosion of social media platforms and apps that specialise in hacking our attention. Expect to learn the truth about multitasking and its effects on our productivity. We hear about the rhythms of attention we experience throughout the day. We learn about the negative physiological implications of our shrinking attention span. We also talk about the damaging effects of smartphone use on children and their development. And we ask, will AI contribute to a further fracturing of our focus? And lots more besides. This is a really interesting conversation and I hope you enjoy it. Well, Dr. Gloria Mark, you wrote a terrific book called Attention Span, a groundbreaking way to restore balance, happiness and productivity. You were motivated to write this book based on personal experience from your time working, I believe, in Germany. Can you tell me a little bit about this?
So I was a researcher in Germany working in a very large research institute. And I had the luxury of having other people writing grants. I didn't have to mentor students. I didn't have to teach. The luxury part was that I could just focus on one project. Sometimes I had two projects. Then in 2000, I came to the U.S., changed jobs, became an assistant professor. And what that meant was all of a sudden I had multiple research projects. I had to teach classes, mentor students, write grants, sit on committees, I was switching my attention to different projects like crazy. And so things changed, right? Different country, different job, different culture. But this really hit home to me, the fact that I was multitasking and having a very hard time paying attention. So I began to ask other people, are you also having trouble paying attention? And other people said yes. And then I thought, well, I'm a scientist. I could study this empirically. So that's how I came to study.
Now, you did some real-world tests on people and how long they were paying attention for. And it seems that over the years, our levels of attention have declined precipitously. Can you talk to us about some of your findings here?
Yeah. So I was very interested to measure attention empirically. In other words, using an objective means. So we first started out, this was in 2003, we would follow people with stopwatches in the workplace. So every time a person would be on a particular window, click start time, they'd switch their attention, pick up their phone, stop time, and then start time for the phone. And we did this for all of their activities. And at that time, we found they averaged 2.5 minutes on any screen before switching, or any window on the screen before switching applications or switching to something else. Fast forward between the years of 2016 and 2020, this was right before the pandemic, we found that attention averaged 47 seconds. We were now using computer logging software, so the software could get a very precise and accurate time for when windows were switching. And this was also replicated by other people as well. So various figures, 44 seconds, 47 seconds, 50 seconds, but they averaged to 47 seconds.
The 47 seconds is very interesting because I suppose most people who are watching this and listening to this episode will be familiar with the success of TikTok and YouTube Shorts. TikTok exploded in popularity in recent years, and I believe the maximum video on TikTok is only about a minute or so long. Similarly, YouTube Shorts, which was created by YouTube in response to the success of TikTok. So, and again, with YouTube Shorts, the maximum amount of time for a video there is a minute. So it equates very, very nicely and synchronizes with your observations in relation to that 47 seconds of attention.
Well, most TikTok videos, to my knowledge, are about 15 seconds.
Okay, all right.
So even though it does allow a maximum. Also, TikTok, you're right, it's just exploded, and it's even more popular now than when we were studying attention. So if most people are watching 50-second TikTok videos, it's possible that maybe attention spans are even shorter on any window.
And I think because these videos are so short, as you say, down to as short as 15 seconds, it's very, very easy to consume hundreds of videos in a short period of time. Oh. I found TikTok, the once or twice I used it, to be very addictive.
That's right. I actually registered for a TikTok account to do research for my book, and also found myself going down a rabbit hole. TikTok has a very sophisticated recommender engine. It's one of the best in the business. What it does is it learns from your behavior, and it's very agile. It learns very quickly, and it learns what you like, what keeps your attention glued to that TikTok video, and it keeps sending new TikTok videos that are consistent with what you like. So it looks at features in that video, looks at features of the individual, looks at your context, like time of day, and you get very accurate representations of what it is you like. And so that algorithm that TikTok has is very good at feeding you material to keep you glued to the screen.
In the early days of this podcast, when I started doing it about 4 or so years ago, I actually set up a TikTok account, and in one of the videos in my own TikTok account, I actually was critical of the format of the TikTok format, and I spoke about it fracturing people's attention, causing distraction, and encouraging a form of addiction. And what I noticed was the number of views of that particular video, which criticised the platform I was on, actually was much less than any of the other videos I'd put on TikTok. So it was essentially blacklisting my video, which was a critique of the platform that I was on.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yeah, it's possible there could be human intervention in this as well.
Which is scary too, that they're controlling the narrative there and controlling any sense of, I suppose, free speech when it comes to criticising the actual platform itself. But I suppose that's another argument. I've touched upon this particular subject before on this podcast, but can we talk about something that you mentioned a minute ago about multitasking? Because many people still believe the myth of multitasking. Can you talk to me about the research showing us about the truth of multitasking and its relationship then with productivity?
Yeah. So first of all, it's not possible for humans to multitask, which means doing two things in parallel at the same time, unless one of those things is automatic. What I mean by automatic is if you're driving a straight route, right, that becomes automatic. You can talk to the passenger in the seat next to you. But as soon as a car swerves in front, your attention is no longer automatic, and you switch thinking modes very quickly, and you get into what's called controlled processing mode, and you stop talking to the passenger because you can't do both. So I can't be on a Zoom call and do my email at the same time. What I'm actually doing is switching my attention very rapidly between the two. So the Zoom call might be on, but I'm not paying attention to it. I'm typing on my email. And so this idea of rapidly switching our attention is really what multitasking is. And that's doing two things that involve our controlled processing or our willful attention. And it's bad for three reasons. First of all, it takes longer to do anything. When you're shifting your attention between two things, there's a switch cost. And the switch cost is the time it takes to reorient to that new task. Think of it like having an internal whiteboard in your mind. So if I'm working on a task, I have the information I need for that whiteboard. It's written on that whiteboard. And then all of a sudden I switch to another task. I have to erase the information on that whiteboard in my mind and write new information. And when I keep switching my attention so fast, I'm writing, erasing, writing, erasing. That's a cost. It's a cost in time. It's also a cost in effort. And we have limited attentional resources, and that drains our resources. Sometimes we can't erase that whiteboard completely, just like with a real whiteboard. So if I'm reading a news story and I read about some horrific accident, or let's say I get an email and I, read about some huge project that I have to work on, and then I switch to something else, that's going to stay with me and leave a residue. So it interferes with our current task ahead. And then two other reasons why multitasking is bad. It leads to more errors. We know that from many, many studies. And the third thing is that it creates stress. And we know that. We know from decades of laboratory studies when people are switching attention, blood pressure goes up. There's a physiological marker in the body that indicates people are stressed. In my own work, we ask people, how stressed are you? So subjectively, people report being stressed. Multitasking is, it's not a good thing to be working on.
It's not, it certainly doesn't encourage productivity. And this next question might refer back to the whiteboard analogy you used a moment ago. I'm just wondering, has there been any research done into short-term memory and its relationship with attention and distraction? Because certainly I've noticed with my increased smartphone use in recent years, my level of my short-term memory certainly has disimproved. I'm seeing things on the screen, but maybe 10, 15 seconds later, once I've swiped on, I actually don't remember what I saw a minute ago, so I'm not absorbing it. So do you have any observations in relation to short-term memory and distraction?
Well, of course, if you're switching your attention very often, that's not going to help our short-term memory. But another thing is that when we get exhausted, if you're switching your attention a lot, if you're doing a lot of stressful things, that also is not going to help our memory. So again, we have a limited amount of attentional resources. They get drained throughout the day. And if you don't take a break, if you don't allow yourself to replenish, then it's going to be harder for not just our memories, but other aspects of our minds to work the way that they should.
Looking at the opposite end of the spectrum then, if we're talking about fractured attention and loss of focus, and if we can just for briefly move to the state of flow, which was made famous by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, can you talk to me about your own experience of this? Because I believe that you used to enjoy a state of flow or something akin to it whenever you were an artist in a former life.
That's right. My first career was that of an artist. I would regularly get into flow. I would start working, in the evening, and before I know it, hours went by. It was 2:00 in the morning. Where did that time go? I was so immersed in what I was doing that I wasn't aware of the passage of time. I've been studying information workers in the workplace for a long time. And I discovered that flow it's very rare for people to experience flow. And Csikszentmihalyi also found this with a survey. And I will explain this by saying that it's the nature of the work that's not conducive to flow. So if people are doing analyses, if you're, working on a strategic plan, it's a particular analytical mindset that we're using that's not necessarily conducive to flow in the same way that being an artist or being a musician or playing sports or skiing or having a hobby like woodworking, all of these kinds of activities are just great for promoting flow. Is it bad that information workers or knowledge workers, if you like, don't get into flow? No, not at all, because it can be so rewarding and gratifying to be doing that work. And it's an interesting challenge for them. It's not bad to not be into flow.
In my initial email to you, I mentioned a horrifying stat that had made the headlines, certainly in this part of the world in recent days, and that was that 1 in 4 children under the age of 6 are now owners of smartphones. You touched upon screen exposure in children and its negative effects in a recent Substack. Can you tell us more about this?
So, young children, you're right, they're being exposed to screens at a very young age. And there's a part of the mind that's called executive function. And this is the part of our brain. You can think of it as the governor of the mind. And it's very important in our functioning. It allows us to filter out distractions, stay on track, helps us with decision-making, selecting what's really important to be paying attention to. It just has a number of great functions. But children's executive function doesn't really mature until they get older. There's actually different phases of maturity. When they get to be about 10, it reaches a certain level of maturity, and then in adolescence as well. But there are recent studies that show that being exposed to screens actually can hinder the development of executive function in these young children. And so there are studies that show a correlation. The more time on screens, the worse is the performance of executive function. There's one study that shows that children's linguistic ability is worse the more time they're on screens. And so, it suggests that there is this relationship with, being on a screen and having it, affect the development of executive function. Now, some of these results could be offset if children watch educational programs. But of course, you can't have a child watching educational programs all day because there's an opportunity cost. They don't get a chance to develop coordination skills or even fine motor skills, or they don't get a chance to develop social skills, interacting with other people around them. So if a child is on a screen, then educational programs are not as bad as other programs, but it's not recommended that they spend long. And in fact, it is recommended that children under the age of 2 not be exposed to any screens whatsoever. And then above the age of 2, there should be really strict time limits placed on screens.
I suppose the research in this area is still a work in progress because the technology is really developing all the time, and we have to wait until these young children develop and get older before we see the real world impacts on their psychological development, I presume.
That's right. There's still research that's going on. There's still technology being developed. So, the only thing we can talk about are the results that we're seeing at this point in time.
Are we seeing any long-term effects of loss of attention in adults who would have been using smartphones for longer, for example?
Well, I would say the jury is out on that. So we don't know about long-term effects. There are a number of people who claim that technology is leading adults to behave as though they have ADHD. It's not saying it causes ADHD, but their behavior mimics that of people with ADHD. And that's very possible. But a person who does a detox, who stays away from technology for a while, would not show these symptoms anymore, right? They would lose this kind of behavior. So yes, when you think about it, we're sitting in front of this device that's a portal to the world's largest candy store. We're humans. We're curious. We can't help but keep switching our attention. And of course, we've developed it as a habit as well to switch.
Could you just, for the purposes of clarification, could you just spell out the symptoms of ADHD?
Well, so ADHD is poor self-regulation. It's the inability to pay attention for a long period of time.
Okay. And so what we're saying then, the thesis at the moment is that possibly the use of smartphones and interaction with social media, etc., is mimicking some of the symptoms of ADHD then in that case, as far as attention is concerned.
It does, and it does not mean that a person has ADHD, right? That requires a diagnosis by a clinician.
Sure. Okay, so to further complicate this story then when it comes to attention and fracturing of focus, then how do you see the explosion of artificial intelligence affect our attention going forward?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have been thinking a lot about this recently. One of the things that I worry about is that our minds will become lazy. Now, we will offload a lot of work to AI. And, in some ways that could be a benefit. It can write reports for us. It can do analyses for us. But it disconnects us from the work. And, we know from a lot of research that people are inherently lazy. We take the path of least resistance. If there's two paths that we can take, we take the easiest one. And if AI is doing a lot of work for us, I worry that our minds might become lazy. I mean, we need to be stimulated. It's really important. So that's one concern that I have. I have another concern in that research is starting to show that yes, AI is making tasks faster to produce. So it suggests that people might become more productive using AI. Software developers can complete tasks. People can write reports faster. But we might neglect to check those results. And of course, there are hallucination problems, and some people report that some reports, for example, writing emails, it doesn't look like a human wrote those emails. And so we might become used to that. We may not question that anymore. Maybe now it looks odd, but after a while, we'll just get used to that. So, there's a lot in the future that lays ahead.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a discussion for the future, but I was just interested to get your take at this very early stage. If I could just revisit social media, you co-authored a paper recently looking at the observer effect in social media use. What were your findings here, and how does this affect our levels of distraction?
Well, we often don't think about it when we put something on social media. It's actually, there are people observing us, right? You're in front of this huge audience. And so this certainly affects the way that we post things, the content that we write. And so this was a study that was led by Gustav Saha, and I was fortunate enough to be on this study. And so it shows that we write things differently when we're writing in front of an audience, even though we can't necessarily see that audience, right? But it certainly affects us. There is a psychological phenomenon that's called social facilitation, which says that when we're in the presence of other people, we behave differently. Now, if it's a well-learned task, people perform even better in the presence of other people. Think of runners in a race. They actually, they break records when they're with other runners. They perform better. But it also shows that when people do tasks that are hard, people actually do worse in the presence of other people. If you're doing a math problem in your head and there is someone watching you, you're actually going to do worse. At least that's what the research shows. And that's the reason whether we perform better with well-learned tasks or worse with poorly learned tasks is because we become aroused in the presence of other people. And the arousal can work both ways. It can work for us. When the task is well learned, it can work against us when the task is poorly learned. So, again, when we're posting on social media, there is the social facilitation effect of, posting in this huge audience.
That's interesting. So in the case of performing more poorly, it's as if we are super conscious of the fact that we're being observed, and then we deviate away from, our skill set, and then we just flounder, I suppose, under that spotlight of attention.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Very interesting. We've been talking about tech companies and about social media and about use of smartphones, etc., and computers. And in order to describe this world that we're immersed in that's constantly seeking our attention, but there are other areas of life that are trying to steal our attention also. Could you talk to us a little bit more about this?
Sure. So I think you're referring to algorithms. Of course, the algorithms affect our attention in that they're designed to, based on profiles constructed about people, based on our digital behavior, to, steer our attention to things that we're interested in. But people probably don't realize that the design of the internet itself is designed for distraction. And it's designed to structure information to be associated together through nodes and links, right? Click on a link, you get to a different web page. Our minds are structured in a similar way. According to the theory of semantic memory, we structure ideas that the closer they are in association, the more similar they are, the more easy it is to retrieve another idea. So if I say cat, you might immediately think of dog because these two items are close in association. So when we're on the internet and you're reading a Wikipedia page, you've got all kinds of these associations that are brought up in your mind, and then you've got these highlighted links. And it's so easy to be primed to click on one of these links. And before we know it, we're just down a rabbit hole, clicking on another link, making all kinds of the other associations in our minds, and it primes us, right? It triggers us to keep clicking on links. Another thing that people probably don't think about is that our whole broader media environment has changed. And shot lengths of film, TV, even commercials have reduced in length. So when TV and movies first started out, they had longer shot lengths, averaging like 12, 13 seconds. And more recently, they have gone down to an average of about 4 seconds. And so this is, film editors and directors and, TV editors and directors are designing this media to keep us engaged, right? To keep shifting these scenes. Now, that's not causing our attention spans to be short, but I would argue that it's reinforcing our already short attention spans to stay short. YouTube uses jump cuts. And jump cuts are just abrupt changes. That's a YouTube aesthetic that's very commonly used. And the idea is to keep us engaged, right? To keep it dynamic and this is what we're viewing when we see media. It could be editors and directors are designing these shots for what they think we will pay attention to. And so that only encourages us to keep expecting to have such short and swift changes.
Very interesting. Okay, so we've talked about the costs of to our attention of all of these distracting things. We've talked about the energy cost. We've talked about the stress. We've talked about having then to refocus whenever we step away from something again. And we've talked about the cortisol levels too, which you mentioned earlier. The big question, I suppose, for people now then would be, how do we reclaim our attention? What things can we do in order to mitigate against that fractured focus that we've been talking about?
Yeah. So one of the most important things we can do is to make sure we get good breaks. We take good breaks. Because when we get exhausted, right, we think about it as having a tank of cognitive resources or attentional resources. If you have a good night's sleep, you start your day with a full tank. And then things we do throughout the day drain that tank. Things like multitasking, focusing long, extended periods without a break, that drains us. So the most important thing is step away, get yourself replenished. The best break you can take is going out in nature. That's been shown to be able to replenish us, de-stress us. You can also understand what your peak attentional periods are. And we find that focused attention works in a rhythmic way over the day. And for most people, there's a peak mid-morning and again in mid-afternoon. And these peaks and valleys of attention correspond to the ebb and flow of this tank of attentional resources that we have. So learn to understand when your peaks are. You could do this by knowing your chronotype. If you're an early type or late type person, there's a questionnaire called the Morningness Eveningness Questionnaire online. You can take it to discover it. Most people probably have a good idea of what their chronotype is. And you can keep a diary. Very simple. Keep a diary over the course of the day for when you're paying attention, when you're having a hard time paying attention. And in our studies, we ask people two very simple questions. How challenged are you and how engaged are you in the thing you were just doing? We would get timestamps and we could map out their attentional rhythms over the day. So another thing people can do is to practice what I call meta-awareness. There's so many things we do when we're on our devices that we're just not fully aware of. They're habitual, they're automatic, like clicking on notifications. You have an urge to check social media. We just simply go to social media. The idea is to become aware, gain an awareness of these automatic actions. And I do this by probing myself. And I've learned to recognize when I have these urges. Do I really need to check news right now? No, I can wait. Or there's a notification. Do I really need to click on that notification? No, I can wait. When you recognize these patterns, you can become intentional and you can form a plan. And for me, the plan might be, okay, I'm going to work 30 more minutes and then I'm going to take a break. Another way to be more intentional is to probe yourself whether you're exhausted or, you still feel energetic and full of focus. If so, keep working. If you're starting to feel tired, be proactive and step away, take a break. And then another thing we could do is practice forethought, which is imagining how your current action will affect your future self, which I think makes a lot of sense to think about at the end of the day. If you have certain things you want to accomplish on this day, these are your goals for the day. Imagine yourself 7 o'clock at night. Where do you want to be and how do you want to feel? And I bet you want to feel rewarded and gratified, fulfilled that you finished it. Think of that. Visualize yourself at the end of the day, and that can help, get you back on track.
Well, some great common sense advice. The book again is called Attention Span. Dr. Gloria Mark, where exactly can people find you if they want to reach out to you online and find out more about your work?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, www.gloriamark.com. I have a Substack where I write regularly about these topics, and that's gloriamark.substack.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn and X, formerly Twitter. But sure, I'm very happy to get comments from people.
Well, we'll pop a link to those socials in the show notes for this episode. But for the moment, thank you so much, Dr. Gloria Mark. Really appreciate your time.
Okay, my pleasure.
Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of the Happy Habit podcast. A reminder, we are now on YouTube and on Instagram. If you want to check us out over there and become a subscriber to the podcast there too, that would be fantastic. Until next time, stay happy.